Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro Game Core. I've done a couple videos about the Steam controller, a review video and then also a follow-up talking a little bit more about Steam input. And it's been a couple weeks since then, and I've really been enjoying the Steam controller. It has become like my main PC controller. I'm using it all the time. I ended up buying a second one once they went on sale, and so I've got that one at the house, I've got this one at the studio, and it's been a very seamless experience for the most part. And I think in general, people are excited and happy with the Steam controller. It's got a ton of features for $100. It's got gyroscope, it's got trackpads, haptic rumble, as well as this grip sense sensors on the sides, and it allows you to fully use Steam input in every way that you can imagine. And so I've just been seeing a lot of people very happy with their device. At the same time, I've seen a bit of negativity about this controller. It usually falls into two camps. The first are people who can't believe that this thing cost $100 but doesn't fully function outside of Steam. The other side is people who think that it's crazy that people are upset that this controller, which is called the Steam controller, is supposed to work outside of Steam. And so in this video, I want to spend some time talking about what it's like to use the Steam controller within Steam and without, and then also what it's like to use third-party controllers as a comparison to the two. Now, I've got a ton of third-party controllers. I could have used a bunch of different ones. There are many different options out there, but I went with these two options in particular. The first is the 8BitDo Ultimate 2 wireless option. This is the cheaper one compared to the Bluetooth one. I chose this one because it has the traditional Xbox layout here, much like the Steam controller. Like with the Steam controller, this one does have a 2.4 GHz wireless option, which is my favorite and preferred way to play with PC games, but you can also use it wired and Bluetooth in some cases. The second is the GameSir Cyclone 2. This is a PC-minded controller that also uses a 2.4 GHz dongle and can also be used wired and with Bluetooth. And the reason why I want to show these ones off as opposed to like a Sony or an Xbox controller is because these have a bunch of connectivity and configuration options that kind of put it closer to the Steam controller compared to those other options. And these two controllers also have some feature parity with the Steam controller. Obviously, they don't have trackpads, they don't have that fancy grip sense, but they do have TMR joysticks, they also have Hall sensor triggers, and each of them have a 1000 Hz polling rate, which should help with input latency. And even though they obviously lack some features that the Steam controller has, they're also half the price. Each of these can be found for around $50 on Amazon, or even cheaper if you go on AliExpress and look for coupons. So what we're going to do in this video is quickly show off some hardware differences between them, but then also dive into the software experience, what it's like to play in Steam with each of these controllers, and then what it's like to play outside of Steam to help you decide if you were to pick up a controller, which one would be the best fit. Let's briefly talk about the Steam controller hardware. Now, I've already got an in-depth video, so I don't want to go too much into it, but yes, this thing feels great. Very comfortable to hold. It's got a pretty unique layout where it's kind of a cross between a PlayStation and an Xbox layout. It basically just feels like a Steam Deck that's been scrunched together without a screen. The controller can connect via Bluetooth as well as a wired connection, and also can use this 2.4 GHz puck. And so this basically acts as an extension to the wireless connection. So you don't really have to do anything other than just plug this into your PC and then have this within range, and you'll just be able to connect it automatically. And that's the majority of the way that I've been playing this controller. Yes, you can do Bluetooth. Yes, you can use it to connect to like mobile devices and use it for Steam Link, but I really want to focus on PC gaming here, and the puck is the way that I use it. The controls themselves feel great. They are rubber membrane, so a little bit squishy, but nice and quiet. And yes, everything is easy to access and has nice ergonomics as well. My only main complaint about the control scheme is that I do feel like I press on these buttons accidentally on the back a little bit too much, but honestly, over the past couple weeks, I've gotten a little bit better about it and not just kind of gripping it so hard, and so it has become less and less of an issue over time. We already talked about some of the other features like the trackpads and the grip sense. It's also got those TMR joysticks and just really nice feeling controls altogether. It doesn't have any super high bells and whistles, but I think this is just supposed to be positioned as a very good standard controller, and it absolutely is that. The GameSir Cyclone 2 came out about a year and a half ago at this point, and it's been one of my main PC controllers. It's quite different in the hand compared to the Steam controller. Number one, it has an Xbox shape to it, so it's a bit flared on the outside, so you kind of push your elbows out, which I personally think is a bit more comfortable, and it also is quite lightweight. It doesn't have trackpads or anything else like that. The controls are also different. They are all micro switches, so very clicky little buttons here. Same thing with the D-pad. It kind of feels more like mouse clicks than anything, and so very precise and clicky. The shoulder and trigger housing is almost identical to an Xbox controller. You can see it even has a little bit of grippy texture on the top, and it does have trigger stops built into it. So you can flip this over and it becomes a hair trigger, a digital input. And so this is really great for like shooting games, and I use that from time to time, but you also have that full analog input. On the back, we have two buttons that can be programmed, L4 and R4. They don't really get in the way for me. I've never really bothered with them other than just assigning them to a random button and using them like that. And so physically as a whole, it feels more like a lightweight Xbox controller with more PC gaming in mind, and it also does have those TMR joysticks, much like the Steam controller. Another feature this one has is a headphone jack pass-through audio. This is the only one of the three controllers that we're looking at that has that functionality. It's also got other features like RGB lighting and the ability to connect to a Switch or Switch 2, so they've got a couple other priorities there, but again, we're mostly talking about PC gaming. It comes with its own charging dock, and this is the 2.4 wireless dongle as well. So you can plug this in and then plug this via cable into your PC, and then just basically use this as a docking station where you can put it in here to charge when you're not using it, but then also when you pull it off, it will act as its own little puck. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of this design. It looks kind of angular and gamery. I wish that we had other options for this particular controller. It just looks a little bit too high-tech for me. Regardless, I appreciate the fact that we have a dock in the first place because it is very convenient. The 8BitDo Ultimate 2 is a little bit different in some regards. Number one is just the feel of it. When you hold it, it's a little bit more angled in, and so it feels kind of like the Steam controller in that regard, and I do find this to be less comfortable than the more outward flare. The face buttons are kind of clacky and loud, rubber membrane, so a lot like an Xbox controller if you ask me. The D-pad is a unique combination between rubber membrane and dome switch, so it's soft and a little bit clicky, but still a little retro feeling too. The design of the shoulders and triggers reminds me of a PlayStation 4 controller. I think it feels pretty good. And we also have that digital toggle here too to make it a hair trigger if you would like. So only the Steam controller doesn't have this. This one's also got 4 different function buttons. We've got 2 right here on the sides. Again, they're kind of out of the way and I appreciate that. And then we've also got 2 up here that you can just kind of reach around and tap if you need to as well. So you do have 4 input buttons, but they're right there. This one also has some unique connectivity options like the ability to use Bluetooth for Android as well as Steam. We'll talk about that later. The charging dock for this one is probably my favorite among all of them. It's really nice and sleek looking. It perfectly matches the controller itself, so I love the way it looks together. And it has the same kind of setup like we were just looking at with the GameSir, where on the bottom right here, you can house the dongle. And so you can either put the dongle directly in your computer or put it in here, then connect this via a wire to your computer, and then just use this kind of like a puck as well. And so I think just in terms of overall looks and just a clean interface, then I think the 8BitDo looks the best to me, and I love the fact that I have a dock. Now the whole puck thing still works with the Steam controller, and it snaps magnetically onto the controller itself, which is pretty satisfying, but at the same time, I'd much rather have a nice housing or a dock, and there are people already working on third-party solutions for that as well. So I think this is just a matter of time before we have a nice docking solution for this controller as well. As it stands right now, I think the puck just laying on my desk does look a little bit ugly. As far as weight, the Steam controller is definitely the heaviest, 291 grams, compared to the 8BitDo at 246, and then finally the GameSir at 231. So not a huge difference between them, but you can definitely feel that the GameSir is much lighter than the Steam controller, which again makes sense. This one is bigger, it's got trackpads, it's got those additional buttons on the back. This is just a heftier controller all around. None of them are overly heavy in any way. They're about the same weight as an Xbox or PlayStation controller, so no major complaints there, but if you're looking for the lightest one, that's the GameSir. So as far as hardware goes, I think the Steam controller has the most options between the trackpads, the grip sense, the capacitive caps on the tops here, and then the fact that this can be used as a keyboard and mouse when you're navigating through an OS, which can be really handy. And then I think that these other 2 ones have their own features, but they're a bit more limited. I would classify these 2 as just being a bit more standard in terms of third-party controllers, but with some additional features like this one can connect like a PlayStation controller or a Nintendo Switch controller, which is kind of unique. And then this one has like that really nice dock, which I think is awesome as well. So the way I see it between these 3, if I was just to pick up a game and just want to play and not have to worry about special inputs or anything else like that, the GameSir is the one that I would pick. And I think that makes sense because this is the one that I've used the most over the past year and a half. But if I really want to get into the weeds and really enjoy the benefits of Steam input and Steam in general, then obviously the Steam controller is going to be the way to go, just because you have so many additional input options. Okay, now let's talk about the software experience between all of these various controllers and some of the functions that you can and cannot do. We're going to start with the Steam controller, just talk about some of the crazy things you can do with Steam input in general with this little guy. So over here on my computer, let's go into Steam and then settings and then controller. And the main thing I want to do is just show that, yes, it shows up as a Steam controller. Everything works nicely there. And if we go into details, there's an option down here that says calibration and advanced settings. If we open that up, we can make a lot of adjustments. So first of all, you could adjust your joystick dead zone for either side. And then also you can calibrate your gyro. But it's really the grip sensor that is unique because this one is only on the Steam controller as of right now. So this is going to be the sensor that's along the sides. And the thing that's really important about this is that you can now adjust the range of it. Previously, when I made my other videos, they didn't have this setting yet, but they just recently added it. Now, this allows you to change it in two different ways. The first is that you can do the grip sensor range. This means that how easily it picks up on when you grab it. And then also there's the grip responsiveness. This is how sensitive it's going to be when you remove your hand. And the defaults are going to be around here. And I found that for the grip sensor range, this is how quickly it picks up on your fingers. This is fine, but it's the responsiveness that I like to adjust because the more that you slide this to the right, that means the further you have to remove your hand before it actually picks up on it. And I've gotten a couple like ghost or accidental touches by having this just be a little bit too sensitive. So I've scaled this over about halfway through from the default setting, and this has been ideal for me. So that's a great thing that you can adjust now. Also in the output settings, this is where you can adjust things like the rumble intensity. By default, it's 7 dB. I think that's perfect. Now, beyond just the regular controller settings you can do on the Steam controller, there's the whole Steam input thing, which I made a whole video about, but let's just briefly talk about the options that you have with the Steam controller. So if we go into a game, then into the controller icon and go into edit layout, you will see there's just a ton of options here. In the buttons option, this is where you can adjust things like, your default face buttons, but then the extended buttons, L4, L5, and so on. Also your grips. So you can assign these to whatever you would like. In the trigger section, we have the ability to adjust things like the full pull, so holding it down all the way versus soft pull and so on. And if you go into the triggers cog, there's all sorts of stuff. You can set it up as a hair trigger or just a simple threshold. There's just a lot to talk about here. So yes, you've got a lot of nuance that you wouldn't find on other controllers that don't have Steam input. We've also got capacitive touch on the top of these joysticks, which allow you to make that an additional adjustment if you would like to activate gyro, things like that. And then of course, we've got all that trackpad stuff too, which is not going to be found on other controllers, and you can change this to all sorts of things. And one thing that I got wrong in a previous video is there is a difference between joystick and as joystick. Joystick means that the trackpad is basically going to function like an analog stick. As joystick means it's going to be a mouse input that also functions like a joystick as well. So that's going to be a little bit more granular, like actually using a trackpad. But either way, yes, you've got a lot of options here. And of course, you could just use it as a simple mouse as well. And then finally, also under gyro, you've got a bunch of other options here, including like creating radial menus and touch menus. And then of course you can have it just calibrated to like your mouse input or a joystick camera or deflection. So lots of different options here with the Steam controller. One of the many things that makes this unique, and obviously that would take me hours to go through each and everything, but I just want to give you an idea of what you can do in a Steam controller. So let's try out some of the other controllers and see what you cannot do when you compare them. We're going to start with the GameSir Cyclone 2. So I've already plugged this in using the wireless USB dongle, and I've also added in the GameSir Connect software. I had to install this from the Microsoft Store and then just open it up, and that's it. And within here, it's pretty impressive the amount of things that you can do, but I'm also a little annoyed that I have to use third-party software in the first place. I'd much rather just do this within Steam, but it's kind of a hybrid. We'll talk about that later. So going into GameSir Connect, you have multiple different profiles that you can set up, and then within each of these, you've got multiple things you can do. For example, your different lighting effects. So you've got 4 different presets that you can set up depending on your controller, and that's per profile. So you've got, 16 different things that you can do. This home page right here is kind of like your quick menu, and so you can make just some quick adjustments here. Your trigger dead zones and like your stick dead zones, your anti-dead zones to make them go a little bit further than you would expect. And then of course assigning some of your buttons as well. You can also change your polling rate here. I've got it set to 1000 Hertz, but some people prefer 500 and so on. And so that is another thing you can do. Now, if you click on any of these, it'll bring up like all of the individual tabs. And so you can get in a little bit more granular with each of the details. And so this is where you can assign things like the 2 back buttons on your Cyclone 2. So if you wanted the L4 button to be, say, for example, your X button, then you could set that up. You could also go into advanced settings and you've got almost the same stuff that you can do in Steam input. You can set it up as a mouse click or a keyboard input or the number pad. So you do have some additional options. You can also set up macros if you would want as well. But let's say that we want to set this to the X button, which would be the reload button when I'm playing like a first-person shooter game. So I can set that up here. And then same thing with R4. I usually will set that to the A button. So that's my jump button. So I don't have to take my thumb off of the right analog stick. So we got a couple things we can do with the buttons, not a ton, but there are some things there. Under sticks, it's really just going to be adjusting your dead zones and the type of adjustment that you want to do in terms of your curve. You can set all that up as well. Even though the device by default will be activated in X input mode, which means it's going to work like an Xbox 360 controller, which does not have gyro, it can still allow you to use gyro because it is built into the controller. So you'd have to use it through the software layer right here. So you'd set up 6-axis gyro, and then you would set it up for like an activation method, hold to turn on, and then holding the left trigger would mean that it would activate the right analog stick. And so you can set up gyro in X input with this particular controller as long as you program it in the software first. And of course, this won't have the wide variety of things that you can do within Steam input to really dial in the settings. You can adjust things like the dead zone and stuff, but it's not going to be the same. For triggers, it's really just, again, the matter of adjusting the dead zones and the curve, and then you can also adjust the level of vibration here, but it's really just a slider. You've got 4 different options. I usually just go with the lowest setting. And of course, the vibration here is not going to be the nice haptics that we have in the Steam controller. This is just a rumble motor in the shell right here. But if it's important to you, you do have RGB lighting, so you can adjust all that here. They've got all sorts of different options, and you can change different colors and really dial it in per each of these configurations. It's really going to be up to you. You can even change the color around the GameSir chicken logo too. So you've got about 4 different things that you can change at any given time, and then you also have 4 different profiles. You can see this one here is one I set up to kind of make it look like a Nintendo Switch, and then I've got one that's just a gold color, and then finally one that's got a little bit green to it. So you can change all these however you would like. So if you're going to use the controller in X input mode, that is the variety of options that you have. If you were to just go into Steam and then take a look at that, you're going to see that the options are quite limited when you have this plugged in X input mode. So back here in Steam in the controller settings, you can see it is set up as an X input controller. I can go to the details here, and it's going to be very limited what I can actually do. If I open up the calibration and advanced settings, I can adjust the joystick dead zone, and I can turn on the game rumble, and that is it. Within the main controller settings, we do have the advanced settings, and one thing I would recommend doing is turning on Steam input for Xbox controllers. Turn that one on there, and then also down here there's an option for Xbox Extended Feature Support Driver. I'm not really sure what this does, but I've always installed this just in case it does help with Steam input. However, if we go to a game like Sulaco again, we open up the controller option and we go to edit layout, you will see that it doesn't have all of the options that we had with the Steam controller, and not even all the same stuff that we had in the GameSir software. So under buttons, you can see it doesn't show any of your back buttons at all. So I'm not able to map the L4 and R4 buttons outside of the GameSir software itself. And again, that's because this is detected as an X input or Xbox 360 controller, which didn't have back pedals, and so that's why it's not showing up right here. If you go into the triggers, there is the ability to do some of that granular hair trigger stuff that I was talking about before with the Steam controller, but for a lot of the other stuff, it's just not there. You can't use those back buttons. It obviously doesn't have trackpads, and there are no gyro options within here either, other than what you can set in the GameSir software when using X input mode. Now the trick to this is that if you hold the select and start buttons for a few seconds while in the wireless dongle mode, it'll switch between different options, between X input, switch input, and then also PS4 input. So I'm just going to hold it right here, and it should switch over from, I think it was in Nintendo Switch mode right now, it'll switch over to the PS4 mode, and you should see that here on the bottom. So at this point, Windows think this is a DualShock 4 controller that's plugged in, and luckily there are some additional Steam input things that we can do, including gyro within Steam. So if we go back into the Sulaco options, you will see that it now shows it as a DualShock 4 controller. We go into edit layout, and sure enough, yeah, we've now got the ability to adjust gyro. We can set it to mouse, or we could use it for a mouse region or a joystick camera, and so on. So we do have the ability to set this up. And you can also see it's got a trackpad section because, again, it thinks it's a PS4 controller. We don't have a trackpad on this device, but that would be kind of cool. I've seen people on Reddit like really finagle things using this trackpad behavior in Steam Steam input with the Cyclone 2. So if you want to get more into the weeds about that, you definitely could. The only disappointing thing is that it still is not going to pick up on things like your back buttons. You can see right here in the buttons, it's still not showing it at all. It's really just showing like the PlayStation glyphs, and that's it. So what this means is you kind of have to do a hybrid approach. If you want to have gyro working in Steam input, you can. You've got to use it in PS4 mode like this, but you will still have to map the back buttons with the GameSir software, which unfortunately, because it's not in Steam input, that means we can't do like a per game configuration like you can with Steam. So let's go ahead and try out a game. Let's do Sulaco here since I have this right here. And I've already set it up to gyro as mouse, and I can hit this cog button right here. You can see I've assigned it to be basically a hair trigger or a half trigger soft pull with the L2 button. That means that as I start to pull it, that's what's going to activate gyro. You could do this also in the GameSir settings in X input, but I like the ability to basically turn it off in GameSir and then just do it only in Steam input, which allows you to do it on a per game basis. And why that's important is because some games might support using a controller and a mouse at the same time, like Sulaco does, so I can set it up for gyro to mouse. Otherwise, you'd have to do something like gyro to joystick camera instead if it doesn't support both inputs at once. So here I am with the game. You can see I can move the camera around with a joystick, but then the moment I press on the left trigger, you can see I now have gyro controls. I am just terrible at gyro, but this is how you would make it work. So yes, it will work like this, and that allows you to use at least gyro in Steam input with this particular controller. Okay, so now let's talk about the 8BitDo Ultimate 2 wireless, and this one is also connected via the USB dongle, and so I can do this wirelessly and 2.4 gigahertz. Now, this also has its own software. Yeah, it's just a pain in the butt. This one is not on the Microsoft Store. You have to just go to the 8BitDo website and then download it specifically for this particular controller. They've got multiple different options. So once you're in here, you can go into profiles and create your own profile. I've already made one here. And once you have that set up, then you can go in and make some adjustments, but it's not quite as robust as the GameSir software. If we go to one of the face buttons, for example, we can adjust it to any of the other buttons on the controller, but that's it. You can't use like keyboard inputs or any other things that you could do previously. So we are quite limited there. You do have the ability to set up macros. That's a different tab. You can also adjust things like your joystick dead zones and invert them. And then you can do the same thing with your triggers too. You've also got 5 different levels of rumble. Again, I like to keep it on the lowest one. It's still, again, not going to be haptics. It's just like your regular rumble motor on this particular controller. You've also got RGB lighting options. You can see I've got it right here under what they call the fire ring. And you can also make custom profiles too. You can actually set this up like per each one of these little things around the controller. You can actually set these each to be a different color if you would like. And it's kind of limited. You can really just do it turning it off. They call it close, but that's off. And then there's one called light tracing. So it's just going to follow as you're moving it around. As you can see, you can change the color of that too. And then also they have what they call the fire ring. And so this is the one that I usually use, where it's just kind of like this nice orange and kind of like a lighter version of orange, and then it's circling around the controller. Obviously, you've got a couple different options there, but not a lot. And then finally, you can also set up gyro with this, very similar to GameSir, where you can set it up for it to be either your left or right stick, and then you can say, okay, you know, when I press and hold the left trigger, for example, it's then going to work with the right stick, and you can adjust the sensitivity and then the dead zone, and that's it. So the GameSir software had more options, like adjusting the vertical and horizontal sensitivity specifically, which is an important thing with gyro. You don't have this stuff here. It's really just like, you know, setting a setting and that's it. And like with the GameSir, this thing's just X input, so it's going to work as like an Xbox controller, but that's about it. So if we go into Steam, you can see it's very limited. And so if we go back into those Sulaco settings here and then we try to edit the layout, then yeah, it's just going to be your standard stuff, your face buttons and everything else. It is worth noting that within the Steam input, you can go and change your face buttons to just about anything. So even though the actual software in the 8BitDo stuff was a little bit limited, you can actually do that here just like you can with any controller within Steam. So you have those options at the very least. But as you can see, there's no gyro. We can't change any of the additional function buttons outside of what you can do in the 8BitDo software, and that is it. Now, the secret to this controller and a couple others like the 8BitDo Pro 2 and Pro 3 is that in Bluetooth mode, it actually has full Steam input. So if you wanted to just use this with Bluetooth, not with the 2.4 gigahertz dongle, not with a dock and all that other stuff that's really great, then yes, you could set this up for Bluetooth and it would pick up on Steam input, including the back buttons and stuff like that. But I think that's really limiting, just the fact that you're limited to only Bluetooth input at all. I think with the Pro 3, you actually have the ability to use it with Steam input as well if it's wired. So if you wanted to use the actual cable and have that plugged in, you could do that as well. But I find that to be really limiting. Like, I would rather just use the 2.4 gigahertz dongle, but that's the one that doesn't support Steam input. So that's kind of a shame. So obviously we've got some limitations with the third-party controllers. The 8BitDo one really is just going to work as an Xbox controller unless you don't mind using Bluetooth or wired, then you can get full Steam input. And the GameSir one will give you gyro, but you've got to use it in PlayStation 4 mode, and even then you still will have to configure your additional buttons in the GameSir software itself and not in Steam input, which means you can't set it up on a per game basis. Luckily, the GameSir does have 4 different configuration profiles that you can use, and so the way you would do that is you would press the M button here and then the up and down on your analog stick, and that will swap between the 4. So you could have 4 different profiles for your 2 back buttons, and so they would do different things depending on the profile you're using. So it's not a per game configuration, but I don't know, that might work out pretty well, where depending on what type of game you're playing, you've at least got 4 different options. Now, on the other hand, when playing outside of Steam, this is where those third-party controllers might be at an advantage. So for example, let's take the 8BitDo controller, which is still plugged in here. And if I go to my game controllers control panel tab right here, you can see that it actually picks it up as the 8BitDo Ultimate 2. And so I can go here into the properties, and for example, I can see how the analog sticks are working. Everything is working okay. It's being picked up as a game controller, which is really important here, and something that you would not see with the Steam controller, which we'll try here in a second. Now here we are with the GameSir controller. I've also got it plugged in. It's still set in that DualShock 4 mode, so it thinks it's a PS4 controller. If we go into the game controller section again, you can see that it's set up as a wireless controller. We go into properties here, and yes, our analog sticks are working. So everything seems to be working correctly. And so yes, this is actually being picked up on as an actual controller. And then finally, the Steam controller, got it plugged in with the puck and everything, and it's just not showing up as a controller at all. And that's because it is basically a fancy keyboard and mouse that happens to have controller inputs on it. And that's what Windows recognizes. It sees it as a keyboard and mouse that's plugged in that happens to also give you gamepad inputs when you press on a button. And unfortunately, at the system level, Windows isn't really happy with that. So it doesn't really work all that well. It really depends on the game that you're trying to open up. But if you try to open up something like via the Xbox app, like a Game Pass game, most times it's not going to work. Now the controller is very new, but there's a lot of enthusiasts involved in it, so I've already seen quite a few developments already. I already talked about in my other videos an app called Scissor, which allows you to basically treat the Steam controller like an Xbox controller or a PlayStation controller, and that's going to work at the Windows level. I've seen a couple other ones pop up already too. I'll leave a bunch of them linked down below if you want to try them out. Some of these are like vibe coded, so I'm not really sure how great and efficient they're going to be, but I have seen these popping up left and right. Additionally, there have been some updates to SDL, which is like the library that people will use for controller inputs outside of just straight up X input mode. And this will work on a lot of different games that support SDL, including emulators like the PS3 emulator, the CMU emulator. There are a bunch that will input with SDL, so this is really helpful. And the new update does include Steam controller input support. That means that at some point you will be able to use the games that support SDL with the Steam controller natively without having to use any sort of third-party software. So I think that a lot of changes and updates will be coming. So opening up my Xbox app right here, I've got Game Pass loaded up and I installed Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge. So this is just a standard Xbox game. I've got it on Steam, but I want to see if it works via Game Pass. So I've got the Steam controller still plugged in. I'm going to hit play here and let the game boot up. And so here I am in the game, and yeah, it's actually working. Like I can navigate through the system and whatnot. But if you look down at the bottom, you can see that it shows the enter key for the bottom right, and then also over there the backspace key for your like back out or cancel button. So this thinks I have a keyboard plugged in, and that's why it's actually working. It's not because it picked up on the gamepad. It's just a game that happens to allow you to use a keyboard to play it. And so that's why I'm able to navigate through this game, but it's only because I'm tricking the system, because it thinks that the Steam controller is actually a keyboard. So this is not actual gamepad support, but rather just the ability to use a keyboard. And sure enough, once I actually get into the game, none of the inputs are actually working because it's not expecting me to use the arrow keys. It's expecting me to use a gamepad. And so unfortunately, I cannot play this actual game. I can just get the game to actually start up and that's it. Now in the Steam Advanced Controller settings, when you have the Steam controller plugged in, you can go in here and there's a bottom thing right here that says non-game controller layouts, desktop layout. We can edit this. And we have two different options, desktop and then gamepad layout. So this essentially is supposed to work when you have this thing plugged in, but you're not running a Steam game like right now. And so you're supposed to be able to use desktop mode, which is what I'm using right now. That was what I was able to get into Ninja Turtles with. But there's also a gamepad mode. The way you activate that is you press and hold the start button for a few seconds, and then it'll actually boot over into what they call gamepad mode. And if we look at the gamepad mode layout, you can see that it's all set up like an actual gamepad where the joysticks and everything else is just working as intended. And so here, while Steam is in the front, if I press and hold the start button on the very bottom right of this screen, you will see that it's going to show the action set activated gamepad. So now this is supposed to function like an actual gamepad where the A button's A and so on. But if we go back into that game, it doesn't actually change it. In fact, none of the controls will work at that point, including like just the keyboard inputs that we were using before. So there's obviously a disconnect between using the Steam controller with non-Steam games. And there's some ways where you can get it to work, like you can import the game as a non-Steam game, and then sometimes it'll work within Steam, but it's still not a very seamless process. And that's probably one of the biggest hiccups if you're trying to play this controller outside of Steam, is that often it just won't work correctly. Now, obviously, how important this is to you really depends on how often you're going to be playing outside of Steam. This is only a problem if you use the Steam controller, which has the word Steam in it, outside of Steam, and you may not have this issue at all. So it really comes down to what's important to you. If you're just going to be playing Steam, then no problem whatsoever. If you've got, something running Steam OS or Casio OS or even Bazite, all those are just going to work seamlessly for the most part if you're staying within the Steam ecosystem. And all that's wonderful. Even on Windows, if you just play your Steam games, you're not really going to run into any issues, and you have all the great Steam input stuff that you want. If you're going to be playing outside of Steam, it really depends on how much work you're willing to put in. Do you want to run a third-party app in the background like Scissor, the other ones I was talking about? Do you want to also import all of your games as non-Steam games and try them out that way? It really depends on how far you're willing to go, but it is going to take a little bit of work. Meanwhile, I took my GameSir controller, I plugged this one in instead of the Steam controller, just hooked up the dongle, then connected the two, went back to the main menu, and sure enough, yes, I can navigate through Ninja Turtles, no problem whatsoever, and it's not showing the keyboard inputs on the bottom right, it's actually showing the PS4 inputs. That's because, again, it thinks it has a PS4 controller connected. And so, of course, this is working perfectly. I'm getting the rumble and I'm able to use the buttons and everything else. So I'm able to play the game now because this is going to support X input as well as PS4 input. So these things are all doable with the Steam controller, but it's going to be seamless with a controller like this, which allows you to use the true X input or PS4. Your limitations will come with Steam. And so you're not going to be able to do things like Steam input, be able to set up your gyro easily or your back buttons at the same time, all those per game configurations that you can do on the Steam controller. So again, it really comes down to your own priority. Okay, so at this point, we've talked about the hardware, we've talked about the software, and I'm hoping at this point you have a good idea of what's going to be the best fit for you if you're looking for a new controller. When it comes down to it, if you're planning on playing with Steam in general, then the Steam controller is a no-brainer. Yes, it's more expensive than the others, it's $100 compared to $50, but you're going to have so many different input options with this that will just last you for years and years, and this one also has exceptional repairability, so you're able to pull this apart and then get upgraded parts, which is something that's going to be a little bit harder to do with these other two companies, which honestly do a pretty good job when it comes to repair, but nothing like what I've seen with Steam and iFixit. If you're still going to play mostly in the Steam ecosystem, but you also want to save as much money as possible, these two controllers are half the price of the Steam controller. But it is going to limit some of the things. For example, all the different Steam inputs that you can use, and even then, you'll have to use their own software to adjust things like the back buttons and so on. At the same time, if you plan on using a variety of different game platforms, Epic Game Store, GOG, Game Pass, Xbox, all that kind of stuff, then it may be in your best interest to try out one of these X input controllers just because it's a seamless way of playing. You can still do a lot of that with the Steam controller, but it will require third-party software and then just kind of additional layers of complication. At the end of the day, none of these are going to be perfect for every single thing. If you want to stick with Steam, Steam controller makes sense. If you want to stick with the other stuff, then I think these other controllers make sense. And you can use each of these kind of crossing over that barrier, but with additional work. For my part, even though I have been using this GameSir as my main controller over the past year and a half, I have basically switched over to the Steam controller at this point. Yes, it's a little bit finagly when you have to go into Windows and try to figure out how the game is going to actually work, but with third-party software, and I'm betting with additional software updates over the years, this thing is going to be the one to get. So the way I see it, I can recommend the Steam controller to just about anybody. It's more expensive, but I feel like it's more future-proof, and it's just going to be getting better and better with new software updates. The only way that I would say that I wouldn't recommend this is if you cannot be bothered by having these trackpads at all, you want something a bit more lightweight, and you also just want it to work out of the box with multiple systems. In that case, I think that these two controllers are still worth their $50 asking price, and between the two, I definitely prefer the GameSir. I think it's more comfortable. I like these little clicky buttons. It just feels a lot more accurate to me. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Have you gotten yourself a Steam controller? How has it been working out? Are you missing some of your old controllers, or is this the one to get? As always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.